All right, hi, this is Paul, and wanted to do a video today on following up from the last episode. We talked about the controversial opening ceremonies in Paris and that scene that they had with the drag queens posing in formation that looked like the Last Supper of Jesus and also was compared to a couple different Greek works of art. And so what I want to talk about today is different but related. And so I want to talk about the transgender topic, which of course is a pretty hot button topic in social media and the news and that sort of thing, because there's such a stark difference between how people think about it and the intensity of feeling with it. So I wanted to explore it, not because it's simply a matter of what individual people choose to do with the way they present themselves, or whether they choose to have a reassignment surgery. Not simply that, although that's certainly the tip of the spear, but because I do think that there are underlying issues that are important, that are fundamental, in fact, that this touches on. And this is it probably speaks a little bit just to the worldview difference between people in different camps on this topic and others, which is for many people, they would say almost everything is simply a matter of personal taste and preference. And others would say, no, there's actually deeper things underlying that are not simply matters of personal preference or taste. And that kind of is probably the headline, the biggest difference between those two camps. So we'll explore that further. But I want to talk through first just what some of the lines of thinking or explanation seem to be around the transgender topic. And so it's one of those topics, like I said, that brings a lot of intensity of feeling, and that comes through with the line of reasoning that is used to support people's various positions. So on the pro-transgender, anything goes, we need to simply support and have no opposition or judgment towards anything transgender related. Would be arguments like, well, there is no binary sex. I've heard that as one of the lines of argument. There is no such thing as a binary sex. And so to try to think in those basic categories is wrong from the start, and therefore any opinion you have based on that is going to be wrong as well. You have that line of thinking. You have the related line of thinking that gender is simply a social construct, that there's nothing underneath it. It's simply something that people have come up with, and therefore it can and should be treated as arbitrary and ignored at will. There's those things. And then going along with that, you have people who feel very strongly things like, and I'm not capturing everything here, but I'm just capturing anecdotal what I've heard. You have people feeling like I am truly a woman trapped in a man's body. I have not this language is necessarily used, but I would extend it a little further and say I'm like a woman or female soul in a male body. That's sort of the picture that you would get. And what's depicted is I really am and feel that I am this thing that means something to me. And it's so substantial, and I'm not that. And there's this gap between how I look or some of my features that I've got to close the gap between this thing and what I look like, or some of my features. And so those are some of the lines of thinking. But then along with it, you have thinking that, well, there's no real strong man, woman, male, female. There's just this and that and everything in between. And all it is a spectrum. And so you might be somewhere on the spectrum and someone else might be somewhere on the spectrum, but there's no binary. There's no poles really there that are meaningful or binding in any sort of sense. And you have that, and you have the idea that maybe you're there and he's there. And then you have another related idea, which is you can change within the spectrum from day to day, or year to year, or hour to hour, or phase of your life to phase of your life. But other people might not, and for them it's fixed, and they're the woman trapped in a man's body. that's something you wouldn't expect to like have a reassignment surgery based on if you thought it was going to change or might change in 1 year or 1 month. And so I will point out that coming from the camp of, I don't think a lot of this is very coherent. I think some of these things conflict with each other, and I've mentioned this in other podcast episodes. If you say there's no such thing as a man or no such thing as a woman, then I don't think you can also say, and I really am a woman in a man's body. Well, what does that even mean? And you also have there the very religious pointing sensibility or language of, I'm a this really, like deep down my soul, and my body doesn't match it. And those two are, you have really kind of the constituent elements of a religious level view of things when you speak in that language. And if you really, people need so deeply to have their body or features match this thing that they really are, then it's also harder to make the argument that it's just fluid and it's just socially defined and it can change from day to day. It's those things are somewhat, at least, at odds with each other. And you have the belief now that is boldly stated that the only thing that makes you a man is saying you're a man or believing you're a man or feeling like a man. I mean, this isn't something that in our culture, anybody that I know of, maybe some tiny percentage of people thought or believed any time from 10 years previously. This is a new thought, but the people who think it extremely strongly. Like, it is, I would say, on the level of a religious belief. It is that deeply held as a conviction that no one can tell you otherwise. If you say you're a man, doesn't matter what the biological or historical evidence is, doesn't matter what your social identity is, none of those things matter. The only thing that defines a man is what an individual says they are. And that's all that it can be. Of course, that begs the question, well, what is a man then? Because it doesn't have any definition or reference if that's how strictly you're going to describe what defines it. If nobody can challenge it, then it doesn't actually have any external meaning other than just language that any individual can use however they want. So all these things are, I would say, massively incoherent. People believe that men can have babies just like women now. Again, that's something that I don't think that anybody in our culture 10 years before believed, and I don't think that it's something that most other cultures in the world now or historically have believed. These are new things. They are new beliefs. They are new religious level beliefs. This is part of a new religion, I think, that just doesn't call itself a religion, but functions kind of close in terms of the strength of belief and the feeling of blasphemy that goes along with it if people disagree, and the religious fervor with which the beliefs are held and espoused. Even though there's no such thing as binary biological sex in this view, gender is simply a social construct. But if you are born in the wrong body, it is imperative that get rectified through gender reassignment surgery. And anybody who stands in the way of that or throws an objection is subject to accusations of aggression, threatening, hatred, bigotry, murder. I think we're really close to the murder thing. You have policies being enacted where parents are not necessarily guaranteed the right to even know what their child is planning to do. It wouldn't be too hard to think on the horizon that you could have a situation with with kids and doctors deciding one pathway and parents not being allowed to have a say in the matter, or even being excluded from the process. I think we're really close to that in some places like Canada, probably a little closer to something like that in theory in California, but these are the things that spread. They start in one place and they spread to another. So I'm just painting a picture. I think the picture is incoherent. It is challengeable, at least, and it doesn't feel like our society and culture is even a place where this conversation can take place sanely or safely. And that happened really, really fast. It just happened really fast. And so a lot of people are not on that train. And I think that this issue is going to, I think it's being shown to be, and I think over time it will continue to be shown to be sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of people. Like, we're just not on board with this, and I don't think we're ever going to be on board with this. So wherever you're going with that train, bye, because we're not going to be on it ever, and under any circumstances. And I think that split is in the process of happening right now. And I want to keep digging at this, because what happens a lot of times in this conversation, I'm just summarizing and synthesizing from what I've heard. So this is all anecdotal. But what gets appealed to very often in these conversations, especially when they turn argumentative, especially around the pronoun issue, of you need to use the pronoun that somebody chooses, which, that reflects an underlying thought process in our categories that we use. So if there's a biological male who in every way sounds like a male, but is saying he is a female and wants to be called a she, well, okay, there is definitely a conflict of sorts. So in the past, it has been that you might be understood or socially accepted that somebody could say, I identify, a male to say something like, I identify with women. And so maybe some consideration, some space would be given to kind of allow that, and not to kind of enforce the stereotype too strongly, or to enforce the category too strongly, or maybe that respect wouldn't be given. But that would be the key question. And then it changed to identify as a woman. And so then if I hear somebody say identify as a woman, I say, okay, I get it. In your mind, this is how you think of yourself or wish to think of yourself. I don't necessarily feel forced that I have to change my mental structures and categories. And I might choose to use your pronoun of preference as a sign of deference and respect, but maybe I don't feel like I have to, but I feel like I want to, and I should. But I don't feel constrained to change my own mental categories in that situation. And then the language has morphed over time to, I am a woman. And if you say anything that contradicts that reflects your underlying thinking that you don't think I'm a woman, then you are committing an act of insult or aggression or threatening or disrespect, or whatever. You could escalate the accusation up all the way to, you're threatening my existence, because you're threatening my identity. And that's some kind of Nazi, hateful, bigot thing. And that is where we're at now. But that's new as well. That is new. That's new in the last, I would say, 10 years, maybe even 5 years. It's just something that's continued to spread and gain more traction. So the position is, well, why, if you don't want to use this language, and if you don't want to use these thought and mental categories the way I say they should be, why don't you? Why is it a big deal to you? You are making a big deal because all you'd have to do is change the pronouns from he to she, or learn a new set of pronouns, which is not limited. It could be infinite. And then you have to think about all of those pronouns. It could be 5 or 100 or 1,000,000. And each person can decide for themselves what pronoun they want to use. So you could be forced to learn, and not forced, but socially pressured to learn, but also maybe forced, learn up to 5 or 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 pronouns, and which one each person chooses. Also, they might change. They could change from month to month or day to day. So the argument is, it's simply a matter of social courtesy, politeness, and respect, which falls under the umbrella of love and acceptance. That is the defense. That is the tool that is used to apply the social pressure. But that's not true. Because what that is really, how it's functioning, whether people intend this or not, is that is a huge power move. To attempt to control people's language that is tightly connected to their fundamental categories that they find meaningful and make sense of the world is close to, if not thought control, mind police, thought police. And this is what has everybody making the 1984 references and things like that, where we're entering some sort of real dystopia that I don't think many people saw coming 10 or 20 years ago, and it came really fast, and now we're in it. And so to try to control the language and the thoughts and the constituent mental categories that people find meaningful to make sense of life and reality is a huge power move. People might disclaim it, say, no, we just love, just acceptance, just consideration and basic respect, basic person to person. That's not how that is. And I think people are calling that out rightfully, because what you're doing when you put on a frontal attack against people's mental categories that they find extremely meaningful and help constitute the reality as they see it, you are shaking the pillars of the earth. That's the way to think about it, because that's how important those basic mental categories are. Now, if someone wants to make the case that we have been ridiculous to think about male and female as constituent elements of reality, human reality especially, they can do that, and of course people have, but I think most people find those cases uncompelling. And so then the fallback is, then it's just consideration. It's not consideration. It's much, much, much more than that. It is a power move. Again, whether that's intended or not, that's how it's functioning. And so you have a lot of things happening now. You have, because of the quick progression of this and what seems to be the complete and utter detachment from reality that a great percentage of the population is now following, you have a lot of people who have been skeptics, atheists, non-believers, and people in sort of an ambiguous place with respect to belief they are wanting off this train, because up until pretty recently, those two camps were kind of aligned. Like, it was kind of the anti-religious camp, basically. And so you had rational atheists and agnostics in there, and you had a mixture of people who would eventually kind of progress up along this hyper-progressive, what's been called woke mind frame. They were more together, I would say, than anything. And now it's switched. You have a big chunk of people that are in that non-believing atheist agnostic camp who are like looking at how the thinking has continued to progress and realizing, oh no, this train is headed for destruction. I want off this train. Because I think there's been an uneasy alliance where, the modern rationalistic mindset has been, we're all about humans, but we're going to base everything off science. We're not going to base anything off the silly old superstition, religious stuff. That's certainly not the Bible. So it's just science. And what's happened is, science can justify so much. It can tell you so much, but there's huge limits on what it can tell you. And science can't tell you how identity of a human is formed. I mean, they can try, but they're not going to get very far. And that's what they're finding out. Like, it can't tell you that there are meaningful categories that aren't just invented by human society, and therefore there are boundaries to what a human could and should do. Science can't tell you that. By definition, it cannot tell you that. It can't tell you how to get identity. It can't tell you that individuals don't just create identity whole cloth according to whatever feeling and definition they have on any given day. It can't provide those boundaries. It can't provide categories. It can't provide moral guidance. It can't provide how identity is provided. It cannot provide any of these things. It cannot provide a premium even on human life. And so this has been pointed out for a very, very long time, but I think the agnostic atheist contingency has been able to deal and cope with the lack of that provision, that backstop, that bulwark that provides those boundaries and that premium and the identity and how it's formed, just off the fumes of kind of historical social Christianity, because that's what kind of helped that along, and it helped it bind together socially so that people accepted, like, no, you don't create your identity whole cloth out of your own mind and feelings. It's more complicated by that. Some of it comes from somewhere on high, and it also gets mediated through your parents and society in general. And yes, you have a say in it, but it's a lot more complicated than you just create it whole cloth. And I think what that contingency, and many of them are realizing now, is, we don't have any levers of influence on this topic. Our sensibilities say, yeah, there are boundaries. Yeah, there are meaningful categories. Yes, being a human does mean something. Yes, some of the categories of male and female are meaningful. Yes, there's a premium on human life, but we don't have any way to convince our former allies that that's true. And so they are now just taking the next logical step and stepping further and further away from those things. And so it might sound like I'm exaggerating. Well, how do we get from transgender to these topics? Well, it's really close. The transgender thing, the kind of argument for demolishing male, female, that there's something meaningful and something somewhat binding about those categories that is inherent, that we're not just making up, that we don't just choose it or not choose it. That argument is really close. It's like a half step away from doing the same thing with humanity in general. Like, what is a human? Because what is a male and what is a female has been, again, historically, a constituent element of being a human. It has carried meaning and weight. And, of course, this is an obvious thing I'm saying, but in this day and age, that's almost like controversial to say, because people are so afraid, like, of oppressive stereotypes and forcing people to do there are abuses and there is oppression, and stereotypes can get too strong and too binding, and there's not enough room to be yourself, and there's not enough room to deviate from the supposed hypothetical, tightly defined norm. Yeah, of course it can be oppressive. Any meaningful category can be used badly and oppressively, and that has happened. But that does not negate its existence of meaningful categories. Just because things can be abused does not mean they are bad. Everything meaningful and good can be abused. Everything. And these categories are no different. But the male-female thing is very close to the human thing. And so to make the argument they're not real, and any derivation of meaning from them that you would then use to kind of form your categories, to form your language, to apply to your lens for society and other people, that's evil, that's an attack, that's aggression, that's a power move. And so if you add that argument to the other strains of things that are happening right now, the blurring of lines with what is a human. So and just the premium of human life, the premium of value of a human life. So we've got artificial intelligences being created that are coming to seem more and more like active agents. I don't think we're there yet, but it's getting eerie, it's getting weird. Even the people in AI that are all tech hungry, tech savants they are worried. Like, we should stop, but no one's stopping. Okay, so We're creating intelligences that seem to have some agency and some agenda. You have people that are pushing into the frontier of becoming human-machine hybrids, where, you've got your computer brain kind of merged or melded with your brain, or you have body parts that will live longer than your natural biological body parts. You've got people trying to figure out how to live indefinitely into the future. And of course, those have always existed in thought, but more and more progress is being made in those directions. And you have people putting serious resources into that endeavor. You have people talking about cloning themselves. I mean, it's already happening in a sort of a machine way, but who knows how much more lifelike that could get. You have people talk about uploading their minds to the cloud, and maybe we're not too far from that. These are all in the same direction. You see, where we've been in this stasis for so long, where a human is a human. There's not much you can do to doctor up a human in some way where you're integrating the machine and technology directly. Although we're kind of close with the phones. You've got this thing with people being furries and wanting to be animals and portraying themselves as animals. And, some people say it's just harmless play and just dress up. And no, I don't know. There's plenty of people out there getting surgeries to look like tigers and changing their physical structures. I think that if you, thought experiment, showed a bunch of children, just peers that had animal surgery, they were having fun, they were playing with animals, they were playing with their stuffed animals, they looked all cute and kitten-like or whatever, I bet you'd get a bunch of kids to say, like, I want to do that, Mom and Dad. I think I want to be a kitty. I want to be a cat. I want to be a furry. This is a kid-like thing to think and do and say. And, really, I mean, all the same arguments that gets used for transgender, I think most of them could probably be applied. And a person would be hard-pressed to negate those arguments if they didn't negate the other arguments, the transgender arguments. And so I realize I'm probably stepping on toes, but these are just things I think they're worth thinking about. Anyway, these are strains. You have a very strong as well. This is a third or fourth thing. A very strong anti-male, anti-man strain within our culture, within social media. You see it a lot where people feel very free and empowered and justified to attack men as a class, to lampoon, to stereotype negatively, to attack as a class, to minimize, negate. Women are sensible and reasonable, and men are buffoons and lazy and don't help and never do their fair share. And of course, with any stereotype, there's always a nugget of truth. You have toxic masculinity and mansplaining and manspreading. You have all these hybrid words, these portmanteaus, where we take man or maleness and then put it with something that can only be negative. You can't do that with women. I think we shouldn't do it with women. I don't want to do it with women. I think we're doing something really dumb when we take a class of people and just kind of dump on them collectively. I think, well, you're going to live now in the world that you've kind of helped make worse by doing this dumping. And I think that men and women are equally amazing and stupendous in different ways as wholes, as collectives. And also kind of silly and foolish and, given to foolishness. I think in pretty much equal measure, just different ways. So you could lampoon either one. You can dump on either one. Or, you could lift up. You could think about what's highest and pull people in that direction. What's our choice? But this anti-male thing, I think it's very real. And I think people don't even know what they're doing when they're doing it. I think what's happening is people are putting up less and less with anything that feels strong or firm, or they might think rigid, that it would oppose them from whatever choice and fluidity and freedom that they want. Because we are, as a culture, I can speak for American culture, certainly, we're obsessed with our personal freedoms and expressions, and we think that that's what life is. And there's a hyper premium on that. And so anything that cuts against that is the enemy, is the Nazi, is the man, is the oppressor, is God, is all those are firm. And this is where I think you get that split with science, with people that are have been rationalistic and like science, and they're realizing that, oh, I thought these people were my allies, but as it turns out, they don't want anything that might cut against their personal freedoms of expression and identity. But the anti-male thing is not going to bode well for humanity or society or culture as a whole. You also have, along with it, an ever-increasing strain of people negative to neutral on children. And I'll be careful here, because I realize that plenty of individuals and families decide not to have kids, and I think that's absolutely right, and everybody absolutely has and should exercise the freedom to decide that. But at the same time, there's large-scale directional changes that are happening, not just in our country, but in many, many countries and cultures, where less and less people want to have kids. It's not perceived as a premium. It's not perceived as something of high value. It's something perceived as in competition with the adult's well-being and their career. And there's a weird strain there as well, with people who are clearly angry that, like, childbearing is hard, and that child rearing is hard. And it's like, who do you get angry at about that? But there's like a weird resentment, and like, why do women have to put up with this? Why do women have to put up with this? Or why do women have to put up with this disproportion? Like that's somebody's fault, and then it is a flaw of design or nature or God, or maybe it's even men's fault somehow, if we could work that out. But anyway, there's a strong strain against, or at least in the opposite direction of a premium on new human life, on babies, on children. And here's a fifth or sixth one. The climate change, everything is a catastrophe, and humankind is a cancer on the earth. And we will all be better off having fewer children. And it would be better off, actually, if there were just fewer humans, or maybe no humans. That might be the best for reality, aka the earth without humankind on it, and the universe without humankind in it. All of these, they're not the same, but they all are arrows pointing in the same direction, which is against the sacredness, the nobility, the premium of value on human life, against the distinction of human life over against technology and machine. They're all things that undercut the premium and the sacredness and the inherent meaningfulness and substantialness, substance of being a human. And again, I think individuals and groups are realizing this at different times, at different paces, that this is what's happening. And again, I think a lot of people are changing course or pivoting, or like, I want off the train because I see where this train is going roughly, and I don't think it's good. And it's a time of great societal change as a result. And I think the transgender thing is sort of a tip of a spear issue. It reveals the thinking, and it is in a particular direction. And as much as people might want to say, well, this is simply about love and compassion and inclusion, there are other things and deeper things also at stake. These are pillars of the earth issues, and it is wise to be mindful when you're dealing with the pillars of the earth. And yeah, there's a lot more to say about that. But I think that's good for today. So I'll end it there. And thanks for being with me today.